just a memory I put in there. So I remember the end of the year and our 2-week SWAT back before exams began, English Lit. We were a small class, only 7 of us. We met one evening at George's parents' pub in one of those bland rooms for rent that all hotels had then. We spread across the chenille bedspreads, and our teacher on a chair between the twin beds worked us through again and again what we might find on the exam. Another day he had us to his home and cooked us steak and salad, gave us strawberries from his garden and ran us through again what we needed to know. We talked about the texts we had pored over through our year together at a table in his backyard, under the long fall of light in the big sky of that flat country that by then I was dying to leave. What we hadn't known that day was that his wife was very ill. I knew, subsequently found out she'd had a miscarriage, and that was very dangerous, and that she was in hospital and very ill. But he kept his promise to us, and which was to get us as best he could through the behemoth of the HSC exam, on which 100% of our results depended, and we thought our entire lives. This is a long time ago, obviously, but nevertheless, I just wanted to say that's not all you can say about those schools and the teachers who were in them. And if I was writing my favourite teacher or teachers who changed lives, that's one of the teachers. You know, I could say a lot more about him, but I didn't. Who would have been that for me. So, and also what I obviously wanted to do was, I can remember the textbook, we had the poetry anthology, we had it's called The World's Contracted Thus, a line from a Donne poem. I remember that's where he taught me to love John Donne, before I could read it in a feminist way, some of the poems. But anyway, I still love Donne. But anyway, as you can see, given that I wanted to write narrative, I wanted to use all the resources that narrative gives me. If I want to write an academic, if I want to write in a more conventional argument, I'll use all the resources that are available. If I'm writing in a narrative way, I'll use all the resources that are available, being as precise as I can about where I am and not holding back in including some affective components. Anyway, it went to Discourse, to a journal that's edited by Bob Linger, who is a pretty straight sociologist of policy, and because the rest of the paper was very robustly argued, I think, that it was accepted. So it doesn't mean you can't. I think it's another tool that we can use to build narrative in alongside other resources that we have. So yes, so I can send you that whole story. Oops, that whole paper, which has stories in it. But the idea that the numbers are already a narrative apparatus, that each of the pages has a cast of characters, particular settings, particular temporal trajectories as well. How events occur along a timeline is a key feature of narrative. I think that's a really interesting thing to think through. Okay, so that's what I did in trying to intervene in the school context where policy was changing things. Any questions? Pause, stretch.
Hi, thanks for that. It's really interesting. One of the things that you said before about flat standards, I thought was really interesting in terms of the way the policy is, in a sense, sort of quite one-dimensional. And you said that in Stella, the standards were different. I mean, let's say if I use the word three-dimensional or something.
Yeah.
How would you, is there a way of, I suppose, encouraging those with an accounting, in inverted commas, mentality to think about standards in a more fulfilling way, if we have to have standards at all?
I'll see if I can show you them, actually. What I concluded was that So ACARA, the organisation that's managing this project, Stella, that's them. What they said here and there, and I was on a national steering committee for a big IT project. I was the English person, and they said a number of times there as well, what they wanted to do was build other materials into the site. So you've got the document, that's the standards. They wanted to also create a whole lot of materials. In fact, I could probably show you those too, if I open another page, that would supplement I'll see if I can find it as well. ACARA. No, I'll try. Oh, AITSL. So many acronyms. AITSL standards, okay. So I'll just have a little cruise through. This is how the standard statements, the Stella statements looked. There were all these keywords somewhere. The keywords that were unpacked by over a couple of years with teachers from all over the country, as I said, across every state. So, and they were also numbered, attributes describing accomplished practice. What they didn't have was the 4 levels, the progression through. It was as if these were aspirational and everybody was always trying to, incorporate and reflect on these at the point of practice where they were in their careers. And for example, I'll just pick this one, 2.1. Oh, it's not letting me click, but it is letting me open a PDF. So, for example, here, professional knowledge. Teachers, so this is discipline-specific English. Teachers know how students learn to be powerfully literate. What it looks like, so the descriptor is very detailed, and it's about what it looks like in English, in particular. So it's much, much more detailed than the very brief standards that we have in the new one. And then there are these keywords: challenge, complexity, fairness, inclusiveness, significance, growth, that are related to that standard. But they might appear, for example, complexity might appear also in another part of the whole elaborate networked interconnecting framework. And their questions here, how deep, complex and connected is the intellectual content, you can use to look at particular narratives, and they were very much designed for people to use for professional change of plan in Year 11. Here's a narrative from a teacher, and next to her narrative about what she did in the classroom. And they were all collaboratively worked on. Teachers drafted them, and then groups of teachers got together and looked at how, useful that narrative was and the way it was told. And then there are keywords, standards connected to it, not one, but multiples. And the keywords, resources, what range of materials, blah, 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 does the teacher draw on? How comprehensively does the teacher understand the discipline tradition? So it's designed for use in professional development settings, not top-down delivered professional development, but professional development of faculties together. So that's, I've avoided your question so far, but this is that sort of richness.
That's what it looks like. Yeah.
That's what it looks like. So AITSL said they would develop, might be too hard to find it now. It's a bit hard to find. Professional learning. They've got so many projects that are all up here. Somewhere in here, oh, here we go, National Professional Standards. They said they would put a lot of money into developing supplementary materials. And they did pay a little bit to they looked for professional associations to partner with them, and we put our hands up and said we'll design some of it. So we did get some teachers in Tasmania in particular, because our project manager was there, their timelines were really short. They developed exemplars, or they became known as, not exemplars, but samples of practice or something. So what we want, and apparently the money's run out, there's not many there. They do have the imprimatur of the Association of Teachers of English, which is good, but we want a lot more of them. We want a lot more examples of material, not just the lesson plans though, so some of them are just a lesson plan or a unit of work, not just those. We want interviews with the teachers that give us video, would be more appropriate now probably, that give us much richer examples of the multiple ways that it's possible to meet that standard, and the money's run out. We did talk about, at a council meeting once, we talked about, apparently in the UK, somebody knew of some initiative here, I think the, is it NATE or NCTE? The English Teachers Association equivalent here, NATE. Apparently NATE had a competition where people uploaded a 2-minute video narrative about their a great class they taught or something.
Sounds great. I'm not familiar with it, but
no,
it's the type of thing they would do. Yeah.
Yes, that's what we heard about. We thought maybe that would be a cheap way of us generating more material. So that's what I would say. Some way, some mechanism inside the site to build up a very large archive of exemplary stuff. I mean, not exemplary in terms of it being ideal, but examples of practice in multiple specific sites with different cohorts of students and different teachers.
But then top-down policy is not something which is particularly welcoming to different ways of doing things, is it? And that's kind of the whole point of this new public management, is that you enforce particular ways of doing things.
Yes.
Whereas some sort of, I think these are really great ideas. It's a question of whether or not there also needs to be political will behind
of course,
their acceptance.
Of course there does. I don't know how to get political will mobilised.
Yeah.
But I was very interested, I was shocked actually and appalled really, that a guy from from ACARA, which is the organisation responsible for the My School website, I think, no, he was from Assoc, sorry, getting confused, came to my paper in Cadiz about the crucible of classroom practice, and I was critical of the organisation that he works for and the standards that he's rolling out across the country, and he was in the audience, and I thought, oh my God, boss will be mad. But it was in a conversation with him afterwards, a couple of days later, that he told me, oh, we're not doing any more of those, the money's run out. So, but I know his name. I can certainly get in touch with him when I go home and say, what can we do to find some way of building more materials that will be useful, that will, you know, prize open the range of possibilities for how people might see professional practice.
Well, we had something similar here, when, I mean, that we were, the Higher Education Academy funded, so that's funded by the government, and they funded subject centres. So every subject this is in higher education, had a subject centre, and Escalate was the subject centre for education, which was actually based here in the Graduate School of Education. And that was exactly what you're talking about. It was resources, people, you know, there were various research projects that Escalate funded.
Well, that's it, funding them too.
Yeah, so I mean, that now sadly, the resources, I understand, are still accessible, but the subject centres have actually, since we had our new government. The subject centres have been got rid of, sadly. But that was really, in higher education, that was, I mean, some subject centres, it's probably fair to say, were more active than others, but Escalate was particularly active. And it was for people working in education at all levels. So whether that was teacher education, higher education, adult education, continuing professional development, and it was a fabulous resource. And it's very similar to what you're telling us about and giving us examples of.
This one, here's an example from our university this was. So in the project that I was on the national board for was about IT and teacher education. So they sort of did some doubling up here, and they wanted to film some students using technology. So they went out to this school where our student was on track and she set it up, and I can't show you, but there's video there of the teacher teaching about water quality by taking the kids down to the river and using some equipment to measure. So I just want more and more and more and more and more. If I go looking, because it's covering the entire spectrum of schooling from there to there and every single curriculum area, it looks like there's a lot there, but if you go looking for just your area, there's not much. So I just want a lot more. So here she is, our graduate. If you're interested. Don't know where the sound is. Yeah.
It might be on the wall. On the wall. Sorry.
It's polluted. How do you know it's polluted? The rubbish. The rubbish? Okay. Yep. The colour of the water. Alright, so are you telling me then that these are all characteristics that tell us whether water is clean or not? Yes? Okay. So all these things, we have to look at all these factors.
Not very radical pedagogy thus far. Teacher at the front, writing on the board.
If I have too much acid in my water, is that a good thing? No. If the temperature is too high, is that a good thing?
Talking.
No.
Is there some
Alright,
precious
so we have to look
statements
at all these things and say,
I'm not sure how I
this
edited
is
it.
good, and determine if it's in the right scale, it will be a good, has a good quality of curriculum. Okay, so what we're going to do today, as you have been previously told, is that we're going to go out to Homebush and take a few of these readings. So determine how clean or the quality of that creek that we're going to measure.
Right, so here they are, down at the river. It's not that limiting, but it is the sort of thing that gives you, and they've designed this one so that it had questions for discussion, so you could use it that way. And it is about the level
So
of...
I want one person from each group, and we'll start like this, to come up and put their results.
She's a graduate
Right, so
teacher.
group one, and then
She
we'll go
doesn't
around.
have a job yet.
For both.
She just set this up
Do you want to come up and put
in the
your
school
results?
she's done her prac.
So you just grab a pen and write your results for pH and temperature.
And the kids are writing on the board in the time-honoured way, although it's
All right, next
smart
group,
board.
Kevin, can you come up for your group? Thank you. All right, so temperature is at 25.1 degrees. Good. Let's not forget our units.
And they're looking at a web page.
How do you use your knowledge of student learning to plan, structure and...
Anyway, what I really liked in the ones the English Teachers Association developed was there was an interview with the teacher in one of them, which was how the lesson didn't go to plan, what you'd anticipated, how it differed from, I mean, that's what happens with every lesson in the world, but it doesn't appear in the diagrammatic skeleton of the lesson. So, you know, that's all I want them to do, is make more and more and more. And maybe have some more interesting questions about the pedagogy, because it looks pretty traditional to me.